Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural commentator. And today we're going to be talking about women in combat. This has been in the news recently, specifically because of Tulsi Gabbard is being selected by Donald Trump to be a part of his administration. And she's been interviewed a number of different times on television and was asked the question, should women be in combat positions? And what she's always answered is that, well, they should be in them as long as they are able to do the job. So her position is that it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you should be able to hold any position in the military as long as you can meet the standards, meet the requirements. And that seems logical, that seems reasonable, except the problem is that in order for women to be in these combat military positions, the standards are lowered. That is a reality. If you look at the standards for women in all levels of the military, they do not have to meet the same kind of standards as the men have to meet. They have different standards for push-ups and pull-ups and all kinds of things, and they are made a different scale. They are given a different standard because of their physique, their muscle structure, and so on and so forth. So there are already accommodations built right into the present military system. So if you say, yes, the women can meet any standard that the men have to meet, and that's the test, well, then there won't be any men or women in the special forces, for example, because they cannot meet the standards. Hardly any men can actually meet the standards of the special forces. And I'm sure we've all seen the Navy SEALs, for example. They're on the beach and they're holding up this huge log, looks like a telephone pole, and they're in the cold water, so they're freezing, they're shivering, and they have to hold this log up for minute after minute, maybe a half an hour or so. And it's extremely painful and excruciating and very difficult. And a lot of the elite men in the military have to tap out and leave because they can't hack it. Well, there are no women that are going to be able to sit on that beach in that cold water, shivering to death, and be able to hold that log up. They just cannot meet that standard. And so Tulsi Gabbard's rule is if all women can meet the standard, they should be able to do whatever the men do if they can meet the standard. Well, the fact is they cannot meet those physical standards because they're different, they're biologically different, physiologically different, and so on and so forth. Well, what was it that prompted me to want to discuss this issue? And it is an article found in the Detroit News, and it is titled, "Should Women Be Allowed to Fight on the Front Lines? Trump's Defense Pick Reignites the Debate." So Trump is picking his cabinet, he's picking his administration, and one of his picks, Pete Hegs something or other, I can't pronounce the name, Hegseth, is talking about women should not be in combat positions, which is pretty non-controversial for most of our American history. And even now, it's very controversial to say that women should be on the front lines. But there are women who are arguing that, yes, indeed, women should be able to be on the front lines. That means charging the enemy, putting herself in imminent danger, and putting herself in harm's way directly in combat against the enemy. And that is totally nonsensical, and it goes against everything that, at least in a Western culture, Christian Western culture, stands for, as far as the men are supposed to be the protectors of women and not the ones that send the women into combat. So, in other words, you have these men, they're home, they're in their safe home, looking after the children, and the mother, the wife, is on the front lines charging the enemy. That makes no sense. And so I'm going to go through this article, and we're just going to read how some of these feminists who are pushing for women in frontline combat positions, how ridiculous it is. And another thing that prompted this conversation is that there's a TV show out called Lioness, and it's a series that attempts to show how women can be just as tough as men in a military setting. The Lioness Squad is supposed to be an elite squad of female soldiers who go into special situations. It's a special forces unit, secretive special forces unit of all women, or mostly women, the women in charge. And they go in and kill and assassination and blow up buildings, and they just do what you might have a special elite force do in the military. And it shows them cussing and swearing like a sailor. It shows them doing violence, fighting, trying to act tough, trying to be everything that the men are. And, you can do that on a Hollywood set. You can make outcomes anything you want because you're in control. You can script and choreograph a fight scene where a woman just beats the heck out of a man twice her size. You can do everything you want. Computer graphics, computer animation. In Hollywood, you can make an absurd situation turn into a victory for a woman who's fighting 5 men at once and beating them. And so it tries to convince people that this is actually possible. And in reality, it's totally fabrication. It cannot happen. You cannot have an elite squad of women soldiers who are tougher than men sent in to do assassinations and sent in to do very dangerous work and have them succeed. It's just not going to happen. And the same way with this article that I'm about to read is this woman is trying to advocate for women in the front lines of military, and it's just impractical. So let's go through and let me read some of this article. I think I can get through most of it, and we'll find out how silly this is. It's by Lolita Balder. It says, President Donald Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has reunited a debate that many thought had been long settled. Should women be allowed to serve their country by fighting on the front lines? Well, it's never been settled, but it was raised by feminists and has continually been raised by feminists. But I think the majority of men look at that and say, that's ridiculous. We want the best fighting force. It's not about DEI. It's not about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not about making some kind of a feminist statement. We want a military force that can protect the citizens of the United States and win wars, not win some kind of symbolic victory for women's rights and feminist rights. So, yeah, it hasn't been settled at all. It never was. But the mainstream media and the liberal politicians and most of the government establishment has tried to convince people it's settled, but it's not settled at all. The former Fox News contributor has made it clear in his own book and in interviews that he believes that men and women should not serve together in combat units. That's common sense. If Hegseth is confirmed by the Senate, he could try to end the Pentagon's nearly decade-old practice of making all combat jobs open to women. I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated, he said in a podcast hosted by Sean Ryan on November 7th. Women have a place in the military, he said, just not in special operations, artillery, infantry, and armor units. Yes, and that is so obviously clear that women do have a place in military. They've always had a place in military, but it has been not in direct combat, but behind the scenes. During World War II, for example, Rosie the Riveter was not on the front lines fighting the enemy hand-to-hand, which she would have most certainly have lost the battle. She would have lain dead on the ground, but she was back home in the United States in factories putting rivets on warplanes and other lethal implements. So that worked out, but sending Rosie Riveter to the front line in World War II, fight against Nazis, that would have been totally insane. And anybody who thinks about it long enough realizes that. Hegseth's remark generated a barrage of praise and condemnation, and they raised a question. Who's going to replace them? Men? And we're having the trouble recruiting men into the Army right now, said Lori Manning, a retired Navy captain who works with Service Women Action Network. Who's going to replace them? Well, I don't think that raises that question. Who's going to replace the women? Well, if it's going to be men at the front line fighting, it's going to be men. And here's the irony. You will probably be able to get more men to join the military if the women are not there, and the women are not fighting frontline infantry, special forces, and they're not trying to bring this DEI feminist ideology into the military. You'll get more men. So this argument is like, well, if we take away the women on the front line and military service in special forces and all these other things, who's going to replace them? Well, obviously, men will replace the women and do a better job because they just have more physical strength and they have more natural aggression. And you can just go down the whole list point by point, and there will not be a problem if all the women in the frontline positions that are trying to somehow make a statement and trying to be the tough guy, just along with the boys, if they take the women out, there will be men who will go in and get the job done. The military services have struggled for years to meet recruiting goals, partly because of the gender ideology and the DEI and the affirmative action and all the other social, liberal, leftist experimentation that's going on in the military. That's why they can't recruit men. It's not because they need women to be there to take the space. Facing stiff competition from companies that pay more and offer similar or benefits. And a growing population of young people aren't interested in joining or can't meet the physical, academic, and moral requirements. Removing women from contention for jobs, said Manning, could force the service to lower standards to bring in more men who have not graduated from high school, have criminal records, or score too low on physical and mental tests. So her argument, this military woman's argument, is that we have to let the women serve wherever they want to serve because we won't have enough soldiers in the overall Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And again, that will not be a problem when you get rid of all of this far leftist radical ideology in the military. Then the men will feel comfortable in coming and recruiting and want to, because of the environment will be better without the women trying to prove, I guess, feminist principles in the military and using that as the forum for proving these. Lawmakers are divided on Hegseth's views. Where do you think I lost my leg? In a bar fight? I'm pretty sure I was in combat when that happened, snapped Senator Tammy Duckworth, Democrat of Illinois, who on a CNN interview last Wednesday after Trump's selection was announced. She lost her leg in a fight in the military. Okay, so that's what happens when you're in the military. You lose hands, arms, legs, all kinds of things. We're not debating whether a woman who's in the military might lose her leg or not. This woman, senator, did, and it's unfortunate, but that's what happens in war. Duckworth, who flew combat missions in Iraq, lost both legs when her helicopter was hit. Added, it just shows how out of touch he is with the nature of modern warfare if he thinks that we can keep women behind the sort of imaginary lines. It's not a matter of keeping women behind the imaginary lines. It's protecting them, letting the men fight the battles in war and not having the women go in and doing the dirty work. It's a matter of principle. It's a matter of a national character. It's not that some of these women can't do some of these jobs. It's that we as a society should tell them, thank you for the offer, but we'll do this dirty job and spare you this suffering and pain and all the things that go along with warfare. And that's the kind of society we want. We don't want women to come limping back from the battlefield like this Senator Duckworth. We don't want her to be out there on the front lines and lose both legs and have to live the rest of her life in a wheelchair. We have men who will gladly go out there and fight these battles. We don't want the women in our lives to have to fight these battles. And men are equipped to fight these battles, whereas most women are not equipped, and all women are not going to be able to do the Special Force elite projects and missions, and shouldn't even be asked to do it. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, praised Hegseth and said that the reality is that certain military jobs just need brute strength. But he added, women have served incredibly well, honorably in combat roles, and I don't think that policy is going to change, but we'll leave it up to him. Others, including a number of military women, disagree. Pete Hegseth's view on women in the military are outdated, prejudiced, and ignore over 20 years of evidence proving women's effectiveness in combat roles. In combat roles? Yeah, I doubt that. Erin Kirk, a Marine Corps combat veteran, she said women have served honorably and effectively as pilots, logistical personnel, intelligence operators, and infantry guns. Hegseth's stance aren't just regressive, they pose a direct threat to the Department of Defense's readiness and by extension to our national security. No. If all of the women in the military right now were to get up and leave, that would be a problem short term, but then eventually, gradually, all of these positions will be filled by men, and the atmosphere would change, and it would be more of a lean, mean fighting machine, and our military would probably be stronger overall. And Hegseth is just basically giving us a recount of reality and snapping us back into the real world, where in fighting, especially hand-to-hand, there's no substituting a man fighting off the enemy with a woman fighting off the enemy. No. She may be a good shot from a long distance. She may be able to drive a helicopter or a jet, and that's fine. But what happens when that jet is shot down? What happens when that helicopter crashes and she's taken captive? And that's what Tulsi Gabbard was asked by Jordan Peterson in an interview. What happens when these women are put in a prisoner of war camp or put in a prisoner stockade? What happens then? Who will protect them from the rape and a sexual assault that will definitely happen? And Gabbard's answer, I guess, the best she could come up with is, well, they realized the risk when they joined. Well, yeah, they realized the risk, but somebody somewhere has to step in and say, no, we don't want you to take those risks, because we have men who can take those risks, who won't then be sexually assaulted in prisoners of war camp. Hegseth has said he's not suggesting women should not be combat pilots, but that they should not be in jobs such as SEALs, Army Rangers, infantry, armor, artillery, where the strength is a differentiator. He insisted the military lowered standard to get more women in combat roles. The services have said they did not decrease the standards for any of the combat jobs. Well, that's just not true. If you look at these standards for women, they are measurably different. There's no doubt about that. Hegseth's view on women in combat reflects much of the debate over the past 9 years and in the wake of then Defense Secretary Ash Carter's order in 2015, that's under the Obama administration, the radical left, that the military open all military jobs to women. That change followed 3 years of study and wrangling and was a formal recognition that thousands of women had served and that many were wounded or killed on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, there's no one disputing that women, when they're put in combat positions, get wounded and killed. That's for sure. Carter said that the military could no longer afford to exclude half the population from high-risk military posts and that any man or woman who meets the standards should be able to serve. Okay, but why are these standards being changed? That's my question. The Marine Corps was fiercely opposed to the idea and sought an exemption, which was denied. Well, of course the Marine Corps would want to be out of this whole debate because they want the best of the best. They don't want to have to be juggling politics and combating feminist ideology when they're trying to put together a force. Special Operations Forces and surveys done in 2015 and more recently said women did not have the physical or mental strength to serve in elite commando units, and doing so could hurt the unit's effectiveness and lower the standards. That's because women, if they get hit or if they're injured, men will tend to rush to their help and feel a natural sympathy for the women, protect the women in ways that they would not do with other men. So they would let the man who was hit with a bullet or something, they might throw him some Band-Aids and say, stay put, but they wouldn't fuss over him the way they would a woman. And that will hurt the effectiveness of the unit. The numbers are small, but women have passed the grueling qualification courses to join Special Operations Unit. 2 are serving as Navy Special Warfare Combat Crewmen, 3 in the Air Force Special Operations Unit, and fewer than 10 are Green Berets. And I would challenge, though, that they met the same standards. I would challenge that. More than 150 women have completed the Army Ranger course, and several hundred more are serving in Armed Special Operations Command jobs such as civil affairs, psychological operations, helicopter pilots, including the 160th Operations Aviation Red. And more broadly, thousands of women have served or currently are in jobs that until 2015 were male only, including Army and Marine for artillery, infantry, and armored units. Lowering standards has been a key talking point for Hegseth, and because it's a reality. By opening combat slots to women, we've changed the standards in putting them there, which means you've changed the capability of that unit, Hegseth said in the podcast interview. Both male and female troops were outspoken since the start of the debate in their opposition to any reduction in standards for the job. Manning, the Navy captain, said Hegseth is conflating 2 separate issues on standards. The services do adjust requirements for annual physical fitness tests according to a service member's age and gender. Okay, so that's a standard shift. But they do not adjust the requirements for specific jobs. Every job. So the annual physical fitness test is changed based on your gender. That's a standard change. Every job, said Manning, has a set of occupational standards that have to be met. Those range from physical strength, capabilities to do such things as color blindness and academic testing. Those by law have got to be gender neutral. And they are, and they have been for years, she said. Monica Meets, who lives in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, was in the Army for 20 years and served in Iraq. She said she served with women in a variety of infantry jobs, including first female platoon sergeant of the 18th Airborne Corps. When people say women shouldn't serve in the combat zone, like IEDs, improvised explosive device, can happen at any time, so there is no front line in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, so it seems to be that there is a dispute, and there doesn't have to be this dispute, that there is a dispute about the standards that these women in the front lines have to make. There is a difference, though, in the psychology of men and women serving frontline positions and elite forces. And again, the men naturally, because it's built into them, this is what they've been trained to believe since childhood, is that the men protect the women. Do we want to train that out of men? Do we want to have now a situation where men don't naturally and instinctively want to protect women's lives and in a special way than, say, a man's life? Do we want to train that out of our soldiers? Do we want to train that out of our men in general? I don't think so. So when you have a combat situation that's extremely dangerous, you will have commanders who will naturally say, okay, let's send a man and not the woman, because we would rather see a man, if he's going to get injured or shot or captured, do so than have a woman shot or injured or captured. Because the reality is, when a woman is captured as a prisoner of war, if you're fighting against the Taliban, if you're fighting against the radical terrorists in Afghanistan, or when you're in Iraq and you're fighting against the Taliban, or you're fighting against some radical terrorist group, you don't want the women to be captured, because they will suffer. They will be raped. They will be killed or exploited, or they will be made to suffer terrible crimes against their bodies and against their minds. And as men, we don't want that to happen. As fathers and husbands and boyfriends and men in general, we don't want the women of the United States to have to go through that kind of suffering. And sometimes it's necessary to say, well, thank you for the offer. I know you're patriotic and you want to serve your country and you don't want any barriers to your serving, but we have to put up a barrier in principle, because we don't want to have you go through that suffering. We don't want you to be in a prisoner of war camp. We don't want to think of ourselves as the kind of people that will send the women to charge the front line, to fight the hand-to-hand combat against the jihad terrorists or whatever army we're facing. We don't want that to be a part of our national character. And so I think that this is a good development that Trump has picked this man to be the defense secretary, and I hope that he is successful in blocking women from these high-risk, highly dangerous positions like the elite special forces, because it's more important that we have a national character. And especially as Christians, we realize that God built in those natural urges to protect women, and we want to preserve and promote that. We don't want that to go away. And this is what will happen if women are simply allowed to go wherever they want to in the military. And so there's a reason for blocking women from frontline positions. Hope that's been helpful. We'll see you back next week on another commentary.